The thing I find about Nigel refreshing is that he will have the robust conversation with you.
So he's not your average posh boy who doesn't know the cost of a pint of milk, to use your words?
No, he isn't, and I do find that refreshing.
Do you think there will be more defections from the Tories too?
Oh yeah, I know there will be.
How many, roughly?
Bigger names than me.
Let's talk about why Reform has introduced this policy on immigration, because Nigel Farage says that he's dealing with what he calls the Boris wave.
I accept that 4.2 million people was way too big a number.
Right, so he didn't put a lid on it, he didn't take back control as Brexit was supposed
it was because we have control of our borders that we were able
to open the borders and let everybody in. Hello and welcome to The Forecast. Nadine Dorries was once former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's closest ally, but now she's defected to Reform UK, the party leading the polls under Nigel Farage. She insists Farage is the only one to deliver change, but are his policies workable? And how does she respond to her new leader's attacks on her former boss? She joins me now for her first sit-down interview since defecting. Nadine Dorries, Keir Starmer said this week that Nigel Farage was a snake oil merchant who doesn't like Britain. Are you getting any kind of buyer's remorse for defecting?
Absolutely not. In fact, it was the attacks from the stage and the platform at the Labour conference, if anything, that would make myself and others more convinced about the fact that we've done the right thing. And I also
joining a party with racist politics.
Oh, it's not racist, Cathy. The party is not racist anyway, and I find it hugely insulting. I've been in politics for 20 years in Westminster, 25 in total. I find it hugely insulting that anybody would describe someone who's an intelligent person who's been involved in politics as a racist, or indeed anybody.
They're not, to be clear, they're specifically not describing Nigel Farage himself as racist.
And the politics are not racist.
But a policy of deporting tens of thousands of people who've made their homes here for the simple fact that they're not British, you can understand why Keir Starmer might describe that as racist.
It's not racist to want to protect our borders, to want to deport those people who are illegally here.
But he's not just wanting to deport the people who are illegally here. He's talking about scrapping indefinite right to remain. And so therefore people who have made their homes here.
I am very sure that as we move toward the 3.5 years towards a general election, there will be clarity around the skills that are required that need to remain in terms of legal migration. Now, legal migration, we will still need to have moving forward.
And you need it for the NHS, for example.
We need it, and as a former nurse, I would say, who trained with my peers when I was nursing were Filipinos. Mm-hmm. So, Philippine nurses were as equal as British nurses.
Yeah, but they'll be deported under this policy because they wouldn't be earning enough to stay.
Reform are not going to introduce policies that would leave our NHS unstaffed.
He's told you that,
has he? Would leave. No, I think just plain common sense tells me that.
So this policy will be refined.
They're not going to introduce policies that will leave care homes without assistance. But
that is exactly what the current policy would do.
What we would do would be that those jobs, those skills would be filled by an individual. That doesn't mean their entire family can come over with them. It doesn't mean they will have a right to British pensions. It doesn't mean they'd have a right to the British welfare system. Of course, illegal migration, as in any other country in the world, is a person to fill a skills gap. And I'm very sure that moving forward, when there is more clarity around Reform's policies, that is exactly what Reform will be looking at.
So the threshold might have to come down, the salary threshold, because you're not going to get care workers and nurses under the threshold that's currently being talked about.
You're asking me about policy details. I do not hold a job within Reform or a title.
Well, we'll come on to that.
Zia Youssef, who is Nigel Farage's right-hand man, which it almost makes me laugh when people level the accusation of racism. Zia is Nigel Farage's right-hand man. He's now the head of policy. Zia will be defining those policies. Right. Zia is an incredibly intelligent man. Is he going to leave our care homes and our hospitals without staff to run them? No, he is not. Right. But what he will do is make sure that those people who are here, I believe that those people are here to do a job that doesn't give them endless entitlements to our public services, British pensions, our welfare system. It doesn't give their entire family a right to follow them. and that those people who are here illegally will be removed.
Before we move on to why Reform is introducing this policy, you said that Keir Starmer's remarks were dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Just explain why, and if you really feel threatened by those comments that he made from the conference platform.
Look, we've seen MPs murdered in the past, and there was almost an understanding that rhetoric and the dialogue that MPs use towards each other, one has to be very careful. And I think what happened yesterday at the Labour Party conference was an utter disgrace. It was.
But you believe in free speech. You're the party of free speech.
There is and Nigel Farage said himself this week, when there are accounts being established, TikTok accounts and other accounts being opened that are calling for him to be for the end of his life and calling for him to. I mean, it's only weeks since there was a murder in the US, the Charlie Kirk murder. One has to be careful. Inciting violence, which is what I think Keir Starmer did yesterday, inciting hatred, that's not free speech, that's dangerous.
And that's what Lucy Connolly was jailed for, and Reform has opposed that decision.
Always a level to that. There's always a limit to that.
Let's talk about why Reform has introduced this policy on immigration, because Nigel Farage says that he's dealing with what he calls the Boris wave. And I'll just quote what he said: millions of people being allowed into Britain, most of whom don't even work and are costing us a fortune. And he says voters will never forgive your friend Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, for that. Is Nigel Farage right?
So, the interesting thing I find about this, and I've yet to have this discussion with Nigel, he's been particularly busy, I've yet to have this discussion with him, is how Rishi Sunak is getting off scot-free on this discussion.
Yeah, but it was under Boris Johnson's government.
Well, just let me explain. So during COVID, a lot of people left the UK. People willingly went back home. A lot of Eastern Europeans who were filling particular vacancies and roles in the UK went back. Cathy, you were reporting, and I was a minister at the time when COVID ended, when the hospitality sector was screaming out because they couldn't open their doors, because they couldn't function, when nursing homes were screaming out, because the bulk of Eastern Europeans who were filling those jobs had left. It was the Migration Advisory Committee who advised the number of people who were needed in the UK to fill those vacancies. And that was, and by the way, the Boris wave word is very much a Dominic Cummings artefact. So it was, so the Migration Committee advised the number of people who needed to come over. Now, I know that at the time, Boris Johnson was putting in place legislation that people who come over didn't have the right, you all remember this, to bring their entire families over with them. So and I find it quite remarkable that people talk about the Boris wave. Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister for 2 years. So why is nobody mentioning what Rishi Sunak did?
So it's a Boris and Rishi wave, to be accurate.
It was, Boris and I will disagree on this. He will say that there was a need for people to come over, and he put in place the legislation to stop those families coming over.
But you think it was a mistake to allow so many people in? You think Boris Johnson got that wrong?
4 million people? Way too many, way too much.
And he doesn't agree. He doesn't agree with you on that.
So look, I'm not going to discuss my conversations with Boris Johnson with you, but 4 million people, 4.2 million people, I think it is, was way, way too much. Our NHS cannot sustain that number. Our NHS resources are being channeled towards those people, those 4 extra million people. So are our schools, so are our public services, so are our pensions. We simply cannot, as the small island that we are, Cathy, sustain that level of inward migration and continue to provide the public services that we need to, that people deserve and require.
You accept you didn't raise your voice around the table and say, there's a Boris wave coming and it's wrong and I oppose it?
No, because I was completely unaware that the number of people, I knew the Migration Advisory Committee had advised that we needed to fill those skill gaps. I knew that there was a discussion taking place about filling those skill gaps but stop preventing people's families from coming over. I was not made aware of the numbers, and nobody around the cabinet table was made aware of the numbers. Priti Patel knew the numbers. She knew what was happening. She was the Home Secretary. She was responsible for the Home Office at the time. The Prime Minister oversees all of our departments. We are each responsible for our department, which is a full-time job. I didn't ask how many people do we have coming. The questions I was asking were, well, I need more money to get broadband rolled out to every home in the UK
Right.
so that we can level up. I need to work on the mid-term review of the BBC licence fee. They're the kind of discussions I was having because that was my department.
But you accept that Boris Johnson got it wrong on this. I mean, the Reform's head of policy, Zia Yusuf...
I accept that 4.2 million people was way, way too big a number.
Right. So he didn't put a lid on it. He didn't take back control as Brexit was supposed to.
It was because we have control of our borders that we were able
to open the borders and let everybody in.
No, Cathy, that's quite a twist on what happened. What Boris Johnson did was, I agree with the Migration Advisory Committee that we need, and agree with the hospitality sector and the care home sector and every other sector that was screaming out for more people to come in. He put in place the process to prevent those people from bringing their families over, who would also be entitled to our pensions and our NHS and our schools and our public services. It was Rishi Sunak that stopped that happening.
Right. Zia Yusuf, Reform's head of policy, who you've extolled as a very clever man, described Boris Johnson as one of the worst prime ministers in history. Have you had a chance to set him right?
Look, political knockabout and rhetoric between opposition parties is as old as the Roman Empire. So, of course, he's going to say that. And I wish he wouldn't. I actually don't like playing the man. I'd rather play the ball. But you know, I'm not Zia. Zia will do things the way he wants to. I sometimes just think that maybe we should just take the personal out of it. And, you know, that's why I was so dismayed with what I heard Keir Starmer saying yesterday and what I heard David Lammy and the 11 Labour cabinet ministers. And by the way, you know, normally after a conference, any party, even those who are struggling the worst, see a bounce in their poll rating, even if it's only minimal. We'll see some kind of bounce. I don't think we're going to see that with Labour this time.
Let's see. It's too early to say, perhaps. But staying on Boris Johnson, are you trying to persuade him to defect from Conservatives to Reform?
No, gosh, no.
Lost cause?
No. He's a former Conservative Prime Minister.
You're a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. You've defected.
That's different. He's a former Conservative Prime Minister. He's not going to defect to another political party.
Right. Do you think there will be more defections from the Tories to?
Oh yeah, I know there will be. I know there will be.
How many, roughly?
Bigger names than me.
Roughly how many are we talking?
Well, Nigel doesn't want many. That's the issue. I know there are probably political names who are wanting to come to Reform who he doesn't want. So
he's turned people away.
I would imagine he has.
But you know that there are people, a number of people, high-profile Tories who are ready to jump ship.
Well, Nigel has said this himself, and he said himself he doesn't want that many. You know, Reform isn't going to be just for those on the sinking ship, to the life raft for those to jump onto. That's not what it is, and it also isn't going to just become a new Conservative Party, because the Conservative Party, and it pains me to say this, the Conservative Party, over the time it's been in government, has failed in many levels. The Labour Party has failed. I don't think there's been a radical visionary government since the time of Margaret Thatcher. I think Boris Johnson would have been that radical visionary Prime Minister, but he had Putin and COVID to deal with, and some very left-leaning, difficult MPs who wanted to see him removed because of Brexit. And I think that what we need in Reform is that radical vision about doing things differently in Westminster and in Whitehall. And we're not going to get that if all that Reform do is bring over a pile of ex-ministers.
You think within days we're going to see some more high-profile defections?
Cathy, I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball.
Okay.
I can't answer that question. But I do believe there will be high-profile defections. I'm very sure that will happen for two reasons. One is there will be people like me who have given their life to politics and have a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience that they think they want to offer, and will want to do so and see how irrelevant the Conservative Party is. There is no hope for the Conservative Party. It is not going to turn its fortunes around. It is not even going to be in opposition after the next general election. And there are some good MPs in the Conservative Party who will think, well, I've still got a lot to give, and I'm sure will go to Reform. And if I were them, I would have those conversations with Nigel Farage. I'm not sure Nigel will take everybody. I'm not sure he wants many, but I think there will be some he would consider.
Boris Johnson says he wouldn't defect to reform because of its extremely dangerous policy on Russia. I mean, Nigel Farage has claimed that NATO provoked Putin's aggression. The former party leader in Wales has admitted taking bribes to make statements in favour of Russia while a member of the European Parliament. I mean, are you worried about that? Did you do your due diligence?
I did. There are policies that I'm not going to agree on everything with Nigel Farage. I didn't agree on everything with Boris.
We'll talk about a few more of them in a minute. But
most of our disagreements were in private and behind the scenes. But there are things I do agree with Nigel on. I do agree with him on the economy. And, you know, it's interesting that Labour actually adopted one of his policies yesterday, which was lifting the two-child benefit cap, the difference being that Nigel wants to lift the two-child benefit cap for two working couples, for working families. What Starmer will probably do is lift it for everybody, which means people on benefits. He will actually increase the welfare bill, which his own Chief Secretary of the Treasury has said is unsustainable in the longer term. So I agree with him on his attitude to public. So we had a big discussion about this.
Did you talk about Russia, though?
So we talked about Ukraine. And so his support for Ukraine, his plans for the economy, law and order and migration were, for me, the central themes of what Nigel and I talked about and what we agreed on.
He's Johnny-come-lately on Ukraine, isn't he? I mean, he's taken money from the Kremlin.
He's made very definite and very clear statements about Ukraine over a long period of time.
Yeah, but he took money from the Kremlin doing his appearances on Russia Today, which is this, state channel.
Oh, Cathy,
and that was after Russia invaded
Crimea. That's relevant to nothing.
But how
that's relevant to nothing.
So it was after Russia invaded Crimea.
There were a number of MPs, I think, who appeared on Russia Today.
Well, you didn't. You wouldn't do that, would you?
No, but Cathy, I don't like doing media. I do 2 a month under pressure. I only do it for you because I think you're a great broadcaster. Yeah, but I'm very limited about what, and so a lot of MPs are very limited about the media.
Yeah, but sitting down with Russia Today, which is funded by the Kremlin, that was a mistake by your leader, wasn't it?
You're not going to get me to say that.
So you're not concerned about his past statements on Russia?
You're talking history. You're talking about history, and I'm just not going to go down there.
It's not that historic, though, is it? In February 2022.
Cathy, the only thing that is important is, does Nigel Farage support Zelensky and Ukraine's right to protect its borders and to have its territory? And he does. And that's for me. And the question I asked Nigel was, it is absolutely vital to me that you have unstinting support for Zelensky in Ukraine.
And he pledged that to you?
Absolutely. I was Secretary of State when Putin invaded. I had my conversations with my opposite number in Ukraine when he was in a bunker and Kyiv was under fire, and he had stacked around him Ukraine's most precious artwork, protecting it in a bunker in a cave. I was invested in Ukraine. I actually led in the very first days across the world, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, countries across the globe, in bringing together an accord where we decided that Russian athletes would not be able to take part in the Winter Olympics, where they would not be able to appear in Russian artists would not be able to appear in various countries. We led that. We were the very first people to do that. I was invested in Ukraine. It was important to me that Nigel Farage is also invested in Ukraine.
And while you were doing all of that and feel very passionately about it, your now leader was putting out on social media, February 2022, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a consequence of EU and NATO expansion.
Well, he said that in 2022. What is important to me today, and lots of people change their minds on lots of issues, particularly in politics, what is important to me today is that Nigel Farage has full support behind Zelensky and Ukraine, and he does. And I'm looking forward, Cathy, not back. I'm looking forward,
right.
and I will hold Nigel's feet to the fire on that if I have to. He will not waver on Ukraine. I'm very sure of that.
We're a few days out from the Conservative Party conference. You have described the party as dead. Just unpack that a bit for us.
Well, it's irrelevant. Nobody's listening. Nobody's interested. It's nobody's bought. Well, some people have, but very few organisations have even bought stands at their conference. When there are stories online about the Conservative Party, no one's reading them. When, people switch off now in this broadcast, in this podcast, no one's interested in the Conservative Party. And it has to go further down. So we know that politics is cyclical, and I'm very sure that maybe, I don't know, 15 years' time from now, the Conservative Party may become fit again to be a force in Westminster.
Oh, it's facing an existential threat, though, if it's dying.
It is. And it probably will. But that doesn't mean there will be people who believe in conservatism who won't come and reform in the future.
So effectively, Reform and the Tories will merge, won't they?
So I've said this all along, that, if Nigel was short of the numbers to form an overall majority,
it's going to be a stretch
next
to form
election,
an overall majority, though, isn't it?
Who can say? Again, we don't have crystal balls, do we? Keir Starmer got a majority, despite the fact that it was wide and loveless and shallow. He still managed to get one. And we seem to be in the territory. Boris Johnson had an 86. We seem to be in the territory of large majorities. But there may need to be an accommodation of some form in the future. Mm-hmm. Whether that will look like in certain key seats, Reform won't stand candidates, or there will be some kind of arrangement if that doesn't happen and Reform are slightly short. Reform are not going to get into bed with the Liberal Democrats.
But Kemi Badenoch would be open to some kind of tie-up, do you think? Would she?
Will Kemi Badenoch even be there?
Right, so you think she won't necessarily be there?
I don't think, I'll make this prediction now with you, I don't think that after next May, either Kemi Badenoch or Keir Starmer will be leaders of the parties. And in fact, I'd put serious money on that. They won't be. Keir Starmer will struggle to last until next May. We know what happened at his conference, his speech.
Well, he shored up his support thanks to Andy Burnham.
Cathy, the point here, it was all optics and it was all window dressing. It was all about muting Andy Burnham, keeping the show on the road for the cameras. When Labour go back to Westminster in 2 weeks, it will fall apart. We know that, though you and I know, from what we know behind the scenes, the warfare is real. Lucy Powell will become the deputy leader of the party. It's Bridget Phillipson won't come anywhere near. Andy Burnham will continue. It was just the wrong time at the conference, the wrong optics.
Well, he's been put back in his box thoroughly.
Let me just come back to Kemi Badenoch. I know Andy Burnham for a very long time. Andy Burnham is back in his box for now, probably for the next 2 weeks. Andy Burnham hasn't gone away.
Kemi Badenoch,
not least because Lucy Powell is Andy Burnham's woman. He's got his person in Westminster.
Kemi Badenoch is poised to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention. Does that not give you pause that, she's now coming up with the policies that you wanted to see?
She can't, because that may be a policy she'll announce. Again, window dressing. And this is why I'm so, aren't so many of us so heartily sick of politicians who stand and make claims but don't do anything about it.
Well, she can't now she's in opposition.
And she won't be able to, and she'll never be able to, because their MPs will never back her, and she'd never be able to get that through. And that's because 2/3 of the MPs in the Conservative Party are to the left of the Conservative Party. They will never support her in leaving the ECHR or the convention. It just won't happen.
You've been quite open about the fact that you don't agree with everything your new leader sets out. But there are a couple of areas that seem...
I said we're not going to agree on everything.
So
I can't think of anything he set out at the moment unless you're going to remind me.
Well, I'm going to remind you about the online safety bill, which is something that you introduced. You were very proud of it.
We have had discussions about that.
Nigel Farage says it's dystopian. He's promised to repeal it. Are you going to try and talk him round on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've already begun. So what I would like to see is the word children and young people inserted into every clause in the online safety bill. The thing that happened with the online safety bill, Cathy, and remember, I took it out the weeds where it was nothing and put it before Westminster in a year. The problem was that every MP wanted their say on that bill. It was treated like a Christmas tree, and every MP wanted to hang a bauble on it, and it became just this bizarre bill which is really unworkable and which the police don't have any ability to use except when they want to, they want to use it and it's convenient. And I think what I would try and persuade Nigel Farage, and he said these words himself and I was interested to hear him say, and he said, I'll say this actually, there are limits to free speech. That was quite important because he felt those limits to free speech when people were setting up online social media accounts calling for his death.
So has Nigel Farage committed to you that instead of repealing that bill...
No, he hasn't committed anything, but I have spoken to him about this.
He's promised to listen.
He does listen. this is the thing I have been absolutely found refreshing and encouraging, is that Nigel will really engage in the conversation. Whereas, in the past, I've had prime ministers who will speak to you through their SPADs and their aids when it's an uncomfortable subject that they don't want to discuss. And the thing I find about Nigel refreshing is that he will have the robust conversation with you.
So he's not your average posh boy who doesn't know the cost of a pint of milk, to use your words.
No, he isn't. And I do find that refreshing.
I mean, he went to Dulwich College. He's quite posh.
He did, yeah. But, I think, I might even have said this to you. I've said this before in an interview, I'm sure. There is posh and posh. There are posh people who can talk to anybody. They still relate to people. They're normal. And there are posh people who just don't. And Nigel Farage is somebody who, not only does he have his finger on the pulse, but he can relate to anyone. And I think you see that, how people have responded to him across the board. So he's up for discussion. He's always up for debate. And, I have to say that in my first days of joining Reform, I've challenged him and I thought, what am I doing? But he's been like up for it, robust and up for it. So
right.
It's a conversation. I probably won't win. But what I would say is that when I ask people, don't you want to protect children, particularly young girls and young women, where we've seen the number of those suffering from eating disorders rise exponentially, the number of young people who took their own life, don't we want in the 16 to 24 age group, right? Don't we want to do something about that? Because I was the health minister who got the coroner's prevention of future death reports. I know why these young people are taking their own lives.
And you said all this to Nigel Farage.
And when you talk to people about that, they find it difficult to come back at you with an answer. So I will continue always.
You've said that to Nigel Farage, have you?
Yeah, and one of the purposes of me being in Reform actually is to have those discussions, and I will talk about children and young people, and I will do it always, and I may not get my own way, but at least I'll have my voice heard, and that's important because you don't always get your voice heard.
A couple of other policy areas that you may or may not agree or disagree on with your new leader. You tried to privatise Channel 4
I did.
when you were in government.
Woo!
Do you expect a Reform government to press ahead with that?
Oh, well, that's one conversation we haven't had. I also wanted to change the way the BBC is funded from the licence fee. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I don't know what the figure is today. I know the figure was 78% of everybody convicted for non-payment of BBC licence fee is a woman, and it's because women carry many cases women carry the responsibility for the home and for the family and for the bills, and I wanted to change the way the BBC was funded. Now, I haven't had either of those conversations with Nigel Farage, and I don't get the impression that that's top of his agenda.
Right.
But I will also, along with protecting children and young people, have the conversations with him about the BBC. And he knows what he's getting with me. He knew what he didn't take me into Reform not knowing they're the causes that I've championed.
Right. You're a former nurse. Have you taken issue with him, the fact that he wasn't able to condemn Donald Trump's remarks linking paracetamol to autism, pregnant mums?
So I haven't spoken to him about that, and I looked at what he said, and what he said was that we would be led by the science in the UK, and that different countries have hit. I think.
Well, actually, no. He said
he did lean into it with something else.
He actually said he didn't necessarily see that that science was fluid, and that he didn't necessarily believe the science experts. He didn't want to trust the science experts.
So here's the thing about being a prime minister: is you can't take decisions about health policy. Your chief scientific officer and your chief. I mean, you can, as long as you are prepared to take a civil lawsuit. And, this is one thing that amazes me about COVID when people talk about COVID lockdowns and some of the policies we introduced in COVID. If Boris Johnson had ignored the advice of the chief scientific officer, the chief medical officer, SAGE and other bodies that were identified as those who were informing on that particular policy, he would probably be in prison now as a result of a civil lawsuit, or certainly in that process. Now, no Prime Minister is ever going to be able to override the Chief Scientific Officer and the Chief Medical Officer when it comes to health policy, unless, of course,
Nigel Farage
he's extremely
said that science
wealthy
isn't settled.
Well, that's, you know, again...
He would change as Prime Minister if he was Prime Minister?
He wouldn't have any option not to.
As a health minister during the pandemic, as you've set out, are you content for Nigel Farage to be advised by Aseem Malhotra, who claimed at the Reform Party conference that COVID vaccines were a significant factor in the royal family's cancer diagnosis?
That was just insane. That was literally insane. And I'm not sure if that person or will ever be invited to Reform conference again. I'd be very surprised if he was.
Will you make those representations to Nigel Farage?
When I speak to, again, we've spoken about there is so much discussed. That's not something I've spoken to him about. But
you would intend to, because that's pretty important.
Reform is, I think it was the first major conference it's ever had. It's learning as it goes.
So it was grossly irresiponsible, wasn't it, to allow someone like that to be platform making those messages?
I don't believe anybody knew that he was going to say that.
Well, he had form. I mean,
nobody knew he was going to say that.
He was opposed to the COVID vaccines. He's made some incendiary remarks about those vaccines.
He used the Reform platform in order to garner both attention and immediate interest in his own platform.
Right. And to be clear, what he said wasn't true, and what Donald Trump has said about the link between paracetamol and autism, also untrue, unproven.
You just have to, the only thing you can do as a minister, and when Nigel Farage is Prime Minister, which he will be very soon, when Nigel Farage is Prime Minister, when it comes to health policy, on issues such as paracetamol and autism or anything else, he will have to be guided and take the advice of the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer, unless, of course, he wants to go outside that and leave himself vulnerable for civil lawsuits.
Obviously, it's up to the British people whether he becomes Prime Minister. But just finally, will you be standing as a Reform MP at the next election? Have you been offered a peerage as the price of you defecting?
So, I haven't had those conversations with Nigel Farage. Interestingly, if I was a man, I probably would have nailed him on a cabinet position and on a safe seat and on various other things. But
you didn't extract anything out of him?
That just didn't even cross my mind.
And the peerage hasn't been mentioned?
For me, I just literally, we have not had those discussions. For me, the important thing was I'm still involved in politics a lot, and for me, the important thing was to remove myself from the Conservative Party. It's toxic, and I've been there since I left in 2022. It's a toxic, sinking organisation. I wanted to remove myself from it. And initially, I was just going to join Reform. And it was a third party who said, no, you can't just join Reform. You have to defect to Reform. Interestingly, I had nowhere to defect from because I wasn't in a position. But
who said that? The third party.
I'm not going to say that.
A fellow Conservative?
I'm not going to say that.
Not Boris Johnson,
so,
then?
Well, definitely not Boris Johnson.
He would have persuaded you to stay. Just a final question. Nigel Farage had to eat, I believe, camel udder. You ostrich anus on I'm a Celebrity.
Is that bloody long ago? It's 2012.
You've forgotten eating ostrich anus?
Did I eat an ostrich anus, did I?
I believe you did. I just wondered whether you compared notes with him on disgusting things you had to eat.
No. I mean, honestly, it's somewhere in my distant memory. It's a long time ago.
Nadine Dorries, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Cathy.
That's it for the forecast. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.